Welcome to Smart Route, the podcast by CallTrackingMetrics, where you'll hear stories from businesses at the intersection of marketing, customer experience, and sales. We're sitting down with business leaders and industry experts to dive deep into the path they took to find success. Here are your hosts, Brandon Jordan and Peter Bacon.
Hello and welcome to the 30th episode of CallTrackingMetrics Smart Route podcast. Today we're talking about workplace inclusion and diversity. I'm your host, Peter Bacon, joined by my esteemed co-host, Brandon Jordan. Today we're honored to have Dr. V. Boykin, a true expert in creating a diverse and inclusive workplace space, as our guest. With a wealth of knowledge, experience, and insight, Dr. Boykin will shed light on the importance of inclusion in the workplace and share thoughts on how to cultivate environments where every voice is not just heard, but valued. So whether you're a seasoned executive trying to foster a culture of belonging or an individual navigating the complexities of workplace dynamics, join us on this enlightening journey towards a more inclusive future. Dr. Boykin, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So we're very excited to have you. I know we had an amazing time initially connecting, on our first call, and I'm personally excited to hear about, your experiences and how that translates into the workplace. So very excited. So with that being said, my first question and one of the things I really wanted to know, the theme, for International Women's Day this year is, to inspire inclusion. And you are at the forefront of forging women's equality. What have you learned in your professional and personal life experiences about the challenges that women face in obtaining workplace equality?
Well, that's a great question. I have all the solutions. That's what I learned. No, what I recently did my dissertation on is the social support systems that will allow women who work in tech to obtain and retain senior leadership positions. And it was very interesting to me when I learned that 80% of women that were included in a study stated that it was their partner or spousal equivalent support that allowed them to ascend the ranks and also retain those positions. And so I was like, well, this sounds like a real simple answer. I'll just go tell every woman to get married. But then I thought, okay, but you've been married. This is your fourth marriage, and 3 previous were definitely not supportive. So it can't be simply the obtaining of a spouse that's offering the support. And what I found in my study is that it is the social support that a spouse offers that actually allows women to thrive in the workplace. And when you look at 15 to 35% increase in profits when you have a gender diverse executive team, or the 20% plus profit gap when you remove that diversity from senior leadership, I was like, we've got to solve for this, right? Yeah. Additionally, there's 43% of new mothers in tech. They leave after their first child. So how do you equate that back to wanting to capture the profits and all of the benefits that come with a gender diverse workforce with this exodus of first-time mothers? So what I found is that it's actually the social support systems that are making the biggest impact. Now, to break that down, what does social support mean? It means that instead of companies offering memberships to gyms, they should be offering food delivery services, house cleaning services, grocery delivery services, laundry services. These small shifts in the social structure, especially for roles that are traditionally associated with women, should be supported. And when that happens, productivity increases and expensive attrition decreases.
Wow, it's a really good way to put it, right? Because there's no one like cookie cutter solution, to success, right? A lot of women that you polled, they had great spousal support. Yeah, that's awesome. But it sounds like the social support, right? Kind of thinking outside of the box is what's going to kind of push, take that to the next level. So thanks for really putting that into perspective. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I saw a meme somewhere, and they said, if I knew, if I knew that I was going to spend the rest of my life deciding what was for dinner, I would have stopped eating, right? Or something like that. And it's true. Like, it takes up a lot of brain space. And when you're thinking about what to make for dinner or what goes on the grocery list, you're not strategizing. And women need to be strategizing. And another interesting fact, since COVID, the work-life balance for women has decreased by 38%. That means we're doing 38% more work. And then you add on to that, 80% of women are doing chores in between meetings. So if I'm putting in laundry, and by the way, before recording this podcast where I'm this expert, I was doing laundry. I wasn't strategizing for this podcast. So the softball questions are appreciated.
Yes. That's perfectly fine. No, we appreciate the answer. Whether it's a softball or a difficult question, I'm sure you're well prepared and well seasoned there. Thank you.
So, Dr. B, you are currently with HubSpot. We're in that same technology space, which can often come with its own set of gender bias or role stereotypes. What do you think are the biggest challenges as well as opportunities for women in tech as we look to a more equitable future?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with managers and how they're viewing and allowing the narratives of members, and especially female members of their team, to be perpetrated or perpetuated. 95% of women in my study were told to be more and less assertive. Make the math make sense. You literally can't, you can't do that. Right. And 100% of women in my study said that they wanted to advance in their professional career. But 90% of them said they have had to pass on an opportunity. So you have 90% of the population not showing up with their talent, skills, and abilities. So I think a lot of it has to do with manager and manager support. Something else interesting that came out of the study that I was not expecting, not looking for, wasn't even sure how I felt about it, but then came around and celebrated it, is that white males were the biggest advocates. They created the pathways for over 80% of my respondents to move to the next level. In fact, I had an incredible and still have incredible white males that are mentors. So I think that when you look across the landscape, what we really need to focus in on is who is removing the obstacles and clearing the path, not even creating the path, because women will create a path, but clearing that path from the artificial barriers that exist. And that has a lot to do with management. And that has a lot to do with really not stopping at diversity, not stopping at inclusion, but digging into belonging. Because once we get there, we need you to be ready for us.
I love this stuff because I have a daughter in high school, and I want all of these things for her.
Yep.
Yeah.
I want her to have every opportunity as everybody else. So, I mean, what you're talking about is music to my ears. And I'm going to get her engaged in, with what you're doing, because I think it's fantastic. And until she kind of grew up and became part of my life, I didn't really put two and two together. But now kind of going through this stuff, I mean, all the stuff just clicks in my head. It's like, yes, yes, yes. I want this for her. She has every right to have these things as much as anybody else.
Well, that makes sense, Peter. You're a white male. You're one of our biggest supporters, right? So thank you.
Well, I'd like to think so. Honestly, I really would. It's important to me. What's important to her is important to me.
Yeah,
I too have a daughter. Yep, in high school as well, and I think something that really resonated with me is not just the diversity and the inclusion, and she's looking to go into sales and marketing, much like myself, right? It's the belonging, right? It's taking it a step further. So that's something that I plan on kind of taking to heart there and making sure that that's something that we focus on going forward. So I appreciate that nugget of knowledge there.
Your daughter, is going to face an additional layer of intersectionality. So she's going to be, and I'm being presumptuous, but a Black woman also in tech.
Yes.
And as, again, being presumptuous and labeling you as a Black man in tech, you're few and far between. Correct. So it's nice to see you. It's like we've seen a Pegasus today. Who knew? But it's a very white landscape, and it's a very male-dominated landscape. Here's something that's very interesting about that. The leadership qualities that people value most are typically ascribed, and I'm going to use some gender norms here, but are typically ascribed to women. Collaboration, conflict resolution, supportive behaviors, listening skills, right? And it goes on and on. Building of teams, building of communities. These are traditionally assigned female values. However, for some reason in the workplace, we attribute them, see them, and celebrate them in men. And men are actually typically invested in leadership programs that allow them to bring out and become comfortable with these traits. So we have something that women have innately. And when I say women, what I really mean is estrogen. Estrogen produces these behaviors, right? And then we ask men that typically don't have these as accessible because of testosterone, which are protection and trigger different things. Yet it doesn't merge together that, hey, inherently, potentially, according to some studies, so according to some science, women are actually better leaders. Yet the landscape, when you look across from managers, is white male. There are allies. I want y'all there. However, there needs to be room for others because it's good for business.
That's a great point. I think to that point, my next question, right? So, and we talked about, maybe like tech specific, like as an industry, but what do you think it takes to achieve? And I know you talked about social support as well, but what do you think it takes to achieve a gender equal world? And, not just the workplace, but right, the world and, these social support systems, what is it going to take to achieve that? And then it's a two-part question, in that case, right, who would your biggest cheerleaders be? And then do you specifically have any mentors that were your inspiration going, in the past or even currently?
So in 2018, there were more male CEOs named James than there were women CEOs in the STEM industry. When you add to that what I discovered in my study, which is over 80% of respondents stated every single one of them had come in contact with a man that had discouraged them. In many cases, it was their spouse or their immediate nuclear family member who was male. And it's hard to even get those words out because that's just so deep, right? That's just so deep. So what is it going to take? It's going to take our male counterparts to stop telling us, messaging us, and having us believe that we're not equal. That's number one. Number two, it's going to take some really courageous people to say, you know what? Thank you for the job offer, but I happen to know that she's smarter than me. I happen to know that she outworks me, and I happen to know that she has better strategy than me. And when I look across the landscape, I know that putting her in that position is going to boost the stock price of this company. I happen to know that science says I want to invest in her career growth and future. And many people will say, why do I need to step back for them to step forward? Why does it have to be taken from me? It's not being taken from you. It's artificially been given to you.
That's a good point.
Yep.
Right? So let's get uncomfortable talking about it. You had an advantage because your name was John. You had an advantage because your name was easy to pronounce. You had an advantage because you had that network. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't celebrate that advantage. It means that you darn well better bring someone along with you. And if you want to capture 15 to 35% more profit, you might want to bring a woman with you. And that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, I think you said something. I mean, obviously the entire thought was amazing, but I think one thing that stuck out to me is being uncomfortable, right? As we're looking across, we're looking at these kind of jaw-dropping facts. I think a lot of growth happens when you are uncomfortable, right? You're having these conversations and you're actually implementing them. So again, thank you for kind of bringing that to light, because it is not a conversation that comes up often, right? Especially, being a man, being in tech or, being in corporate America per se, right? So I think this is a great way, for anyone that's listening, watching, right? Get uncomfortable. Let's have these conversations and let's see some change for sure.
So then I have a question, because both of you are absolutely delightful, but I'm also being interviewed by two men. I appreciate you didn't tokenize a female for this, but how do you reconcile that? And how would you change that? And what difference would you make? And is your tech person a woman, or is the person writing the questions for this a woman? Where do you have that additional influence? Because your program, your podcast will be enriched by it. And I think it's not... if I remember correctly from the little media training I had, you're not supposed to make enemies of the hosts. So are we still friends after saying that?
We are absolutely going to be friends, and I think, right, it to the last point, right, being uncomfortable, right, when we do this podcast and we talk about our guests and how excited we are, and a lot of the questions we work with our marketing team, and we do work with a lot of women, and we come together and hey, how can we best not just serve our audience, but we want this to be a fulfilling your process for you as well, right? We want you to learn something not just about even yourself or us, but call tracking metrics in general. So I think it is, we take a very holistic approach when it comes to, not just who we're interviewing, but who is going to do the interview, what questions we come up with, and what message we want to get out. So thank you for bringing that up, right? It may seem like an uncomfortable question, but no, it's something that we those conversations that we definitely have. So I appreciate it.
For sure. And it's normalizing those questions. And
yes,
when you talk about
absolutely.
what you can do, right now, you both have daughters. What games are they playing with? Because in 1980s, computers were predominantly seen as toys for boys, right?
Yep.
And that cultural stigma still exists. Coding, you think of the male computer geek sitting behind the keyboard. It's not just a geek. It's a male computer geek that pops to mind. So really making sure that even within our own homes, what we're giving people to play with and interact with, like maybe it's not summer camp, maybe it's STEM camp, and those differences, because women are phenomenally brilliant at science.
Yes.
Okay, now I don't have a stat for that. That's just my gut.
I was going to say, do you have a number for it?
I don't have a number for that. I can tell you that 16% of women pursuing higher education focus on STEM fields. And 18% of women in tech hold leadership roles. And so there's a disparity there.
My daughter went to science camp last year against her will, but in the end, she was one of the few females to go to the science camp, and she excelled. She came out of it a different person. We were expecting to go pick her up and say, oh, it was terrible, and she would not stop talking about it. It was fantastic to see this transformation in her. And plus, she was one of a handful of females that were there, mostly dominated by male campers, because it was science camp. It changed her. It really did. There was a different person that emerged from that 1 week away. She came out empowered, for lack of a better description. It was a beautiful thing to see in her. So when you say this, the things like you're talking about, I mean, all this stuff hits home. I'm cataloging all of these things so I can have these conversations with my daughter down the road too.
I love that. And I think what I love even more than the fact that she got the exposure to STEM content is the fact that she must have learned how to speak up in a room full of men. And that can be extremely uncomfortable. The last thing you want to be seen as is assertive. And if you're a Black woman like me, the last thing you want to be labeled as is angry. And somehow when we put our voices forward, like I said, 95% of us are told to be more and less assertive. Every single year of my professional career, I have been told to fix my face in some form or fashion. I was just wondering, gentlemen, how many times have you been told to fix your face?
Not often.
Doesn't happen often.
Oh, wait. Oh, imagine that. So one action you can do is when you hear that, hear feedback about that, I would love for someone to circle back around to my manager and say, you know what? Have we talked about her output? Can we talk less about attitude, as long as you're showing up as professional and the best you can in the circumstances you're in, and start talking about accomplishments? When it's Black History Month, can you post instead of making the Black person do it? When it's International Women's Day, can you post? When you see a woman posting about her accomplishments, can you microphone that? Can you elevate that? Can you expand that? Can you post it in several other places? If every time there was someone from a marginalized community, so a woman, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, person of color, if every time you saw their accomplishments, you reposted it 2 places, this world would change.
Yeah.
How does having a diverse and inclusive workplace, including an executive leadership team, benefit an organization?
Right. So I think besides the profits, the increased profits of 15 to 35% or the profit gap of 21%, there are critical misses that happen when you exclude people from the room. And it's not just, the other side of inclusion is exclusion. So if you look around and you are looking at your executive team, or you are looking at a readout, or you are looking at a panel discussion or a fireside chat, and it's all males, that's exclusion. We can't just call it a lack of inclusion. We got to call it what it is. But think about what happens in terms of a car airbag. They're unsafe for women. And the expense of only using male dummies to test that was deep within the auto industry. You think about what's going on now with artificial intelligence and how it was designed, and it didn't realize, oh, there's black faces, and I need to be able to read those as well in the same way. You think about the profiling that goes on by police using artificial intelligence, right? Oh, this is that person. It looks like that. But no, it's not that person, and we don't all look alike. So when you exclude people, you miss that. You also miss simple things like a slide deck. And maybe it's a slide deck to a customer. And for some reason, you decided to use cartoons because you wanted to be inclusive. But all of your cartoons are a shade of white. Your cartoons aren't all black people and one white person, or all Hispanic people and one white person, right? You look at that slide and you're like, I got one of them, good to go, let's ship. And then you get in front of your customer, and you may never hear the feedback, but they may go with someone. When I'm making a buying decision and I see in your deck that you weren't inclusive and you were exclusive, I have a bias against you. So it's from the macro to the micro. I'll never forget, I was sitting interviewing for a leadership role, and the person had no black people in their slides. The person had no people of color in their slides. And the person only had fit, trim, attractive white people. How can I say I want you leading a team of diverse people when you don't even recognize when there's a lack of diversity? They should have phoned a friend. They should have gotten some awareness. They should have looked deeper, but they didn't even know it was missing. So how does it impact companies? It impacts them all the way from the C-suite all the way down to the individual contributor level. And it may actually impact your ability to get a job because you can't see around corners that you didn't know were there.
It's a great point. I think, right, the entire time we've been talking about, right, inspiring, inclusion, but it just like you said, it affects your bottom line, right? When you choose to ignore that and choose to not, focus on diversity and inclusion, whether it's in your leadership team or even in your deck that you send out to a prospect, right? Ultimately it can affect your bottom line. So definitely thank you for that point. Something we have to continue to focus on for sure. As we think about, women who are looking to, looking to inspire, inclusion, across, different industries and their company, two different mindsets, right? So you have a woman who's just starting out in their career, and then maybe you have someone who's more tenured. What advice would you give, to each of those women, right? The early on setters, more seasoned, more tenured. What advice would you give them when it comes to, inspiring inclusion in their workplace?
Oh, I love this. So number one, I would tell them to get a mentor and a sponsor, right? I have never and remain rooted that I will never, ever refuse a connection request. I'll never not give somebody 15 minutes of my time, ever. So reach out to people. Be bold about it. It will probably flatter them more than anything. And then when you get on that call, ask them, what do I need to know? And what I would share on that call is, number one, you are going to be tempted, especially if you have any intersectionality, meaning you have one marginalized group colliding with another marginalized group. You are going to be tempted to lead with your accomplishments. I am going to be tempted to start this podcast by saying I have a bachelor's in marketing management and a master's in organizational leadership and an MBA and then a doctorate in organizational leadership as well. You're going to be tempted to lead with that. You need to find your Martha's Vineyard. You need to find your Block Island. You need to allow people to de-risk you as a person. So you want to go in full force because you may not get in the room again, but spend the time. Every business is a people-first business. Every business. So don't forget that. And also remember that people like to talk about themselves. So you don't have to share everything. In fact, you could just ask a good, well-placed, open-ended question and allow them to talk about themselves. They'll like you much better. And they're de-risking you to sit beside them at a leadership table. So early in your career, establish what your brand is. What do you want to be known for? And do not deviate from that. Whatever your core values are, those must remain your core values. You can modify them, but you need to modify them with intention, not because the wind changed direction. So that's what I would tell someone young starting out. I would tell someone more seasoned, someone who's in their 50s plus like me, welcome to the 50s club, is by this stage in your career, you should have social capital to expend. And you should expend that social capital advocating, lobbying, and correcting the injustices that you see. Whether that's on an individual level with somebody who's not getting a fair shake, or if it's on a macro level where you see programmatic problems. You have social capital, and you do not have to complete the work of this world. You do not have to right every wrong, but you're not free to ignore it. A loose interpretation from the Talmud, but you have a responsibility. It is an unfair burden, but that doesn't release you from it. So expend that social capital and smooth, right? The roads are laid down, but not all of them are paved. Pave some roads. That's what I would say.
I love that. Those of us that are veterans of life, and that should just be part of our everyday. Been around long enough to see this stuff, been around long enough to know that we have to make a change. And it's up to all of us. I mean, it really is.
I was going to say, if individuals did more things, there wouldn't be these global problems.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like the advice you give for someone starting out. Finding a mentor and making themselves more accessible, and I think that's really great advice. A lot of times people come in and they're dealing with so many different things and trying to make a name, build a brand. But just reaching out to someone, who's been through what you've been through, right? Even looking at the inverse of looking at that seasoned person, reaching out, having that conversation, what do I need to do, right? Put yourself out there, be assertive, right? I think that's a great point. And, something for our listeners, right? Keep that in mind, right? As you guys are starting out, get with a mentor, get with someone who's going to help you get to where you want to be. And again, ultimately, helping to, build inclusion and diversity and, leading to all these great things, not just for your brand, but for your company as well. So great advice.
I have an executive coach. My executive coach is a white male. His name is Dan Tyre, well known in the HubSpot and beyond ecosphere. Mm-hmm. But I have a white male as a coach.
Yeah.
I have a white male that when I tell him things and tell him situations, it's not the first time he's heard it because he works in the space. He works in the space of belonging. And it is so important to have someone who has successfully navigated a landscape that is unfamiliar and at times hostile to you. It is so important to have someone hold your lantern that knows where the path is. There's a reason that you get a tour guide, right? So why not get a professional tour guide that can point out the interesting historical facts along the way that you may not be privy to? It's critically important. I think that if more people cared about profit, more people would care about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. They think they care about it. They care about it surface level. But when you really want to build a product that is durable and sustainable, you would decrease expensive attrition. Belonging does that. If you want to design a product that's not going to crash and burn because you only use male test dummies, you focus on diversity. And if you want to make sure that you are thinking like your customer and offering products that speak to your customer, you focus on inclusion. So if you really care about profits, DEI&B is your best friend.
I have a question.
Summarize it. Sorry, Peter, go ahead.
That's right. Kind of going back to what you had said in a previous answer was the testing of the airbags. I've never heard that before. What was the difference there?
Oh, well, men are taller, heavier. Their bodies are positioned a little bit differently. And what was happening is they were seeing injuries that were fatal when airbags deployed for women and not fatal for men. But because they used a standard dummy in the same way that they use men as the basis for medical tests, right? You miss the nuance. And it was a slight nuance, but they definitely missed the nuance. And I'm happy to send over a link after so that you can include it for all of our readers. But it was tragic. And Bajorek in 2019 and Barry in 2019 were talking about the biases that were included in speech recognition and airbags that caused greater harm to marginalized communities and women specifically.
I had no idea. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, you're a white male. You wouldn't have to have an idea. It doesn't. I would imagine that. I talk with my husband a lot, and he would get out at the gas station and leave the door open sometimes as he was pumping gas. And I was freaked out by it. I'm like, I'm a female. If I leave a door open, somebody could jump in and whisk me away. He's like, I never thought of it as a safety thing. And he's one of the most safety-minded people that I know. There's things that women think about and things that Black, Indigenous, people of color, and people from marginalized communities and people that are gender fluid think about that we never do. Gaps in bathroom stall doors. You know, as a woman, when I go in there, that's not something I would think about. But if I'm transitioning genders, it's something I definitely think about, right? So that's, again, why diversity is so important. Because there's perspectives and things that people go through that don't impact you, and you miss them. It's like when one of the genders held up, I don't know, was it Coke or Pepsi? It was a soda can, and it mimicked the Black Lives Matter movement. Total fail of a campaign. Total fail of a campaign. But everybody in that room didn't understand what that additional subliminal messaging would be. Or if they were in the room, they weren't listened to. So again, if you care about profits, you want to create equitable solutions so that people can perform at their best. You want to include diverse voices. You want to make sure people are included in the conversation. And you want to make sure they belong so they don't leave and drive up your attrition costs.
For sure. Yeah, this has been a eye-opening and inspiring, very informative conversation. Definitely a lot of key points to take home, and I hope our listeners are as inspired as we are. I know Peter and I had a conversation after we all first met, and again, we were super excited, and we knew that this would be the result. So, thank you for delivering. Thank you for such an inspiring conversation today. Before we close out, there's always two things we do at the end, right? So one, is there anything that you'd like to plug, any projects, anything upcoming that you'd like to plug that you're working on?
Oh, gosh. First of all, I'd love to encourage people to read my dissertation, which can be found on drvboykin.com. And second, I would love for people to bring me into their company so I can make people uncomfortable, which will only increase your profits. So those are the two things that I would ask. And the third thing, and the final thought I would like to leave people with is, at the end of the day, the human experience, right? The human experience is a gathering point. It's not a separation or cause for separation. We can accomplish so much more together. And as much as I joke and tease and prod, I have such an appreciation for the humanity in the individual person. So as people are listening, as they're uncomfortable, know that there's an underlying theme of love and acceptance and support, because everybody deserves to belong.
I love that. Be uncomfortable with love and support.
Yes.
I love it. Yeah. And then the last thing, Peter, I know we always, we're big foodies here, right? So kind of shifting gears a bit, right, to kind of end on a different note. Your favorite food, right? Well, what's your favorite food? I know, I'm a big seafood guy. I know Peter has his favorites. And how do you like to prepare it? Do you go out to eat it? Is it something you cook at home? But yeah, what is your favorite food?
I'm going to give you two answers. The first one is it would be my favorite food is any food that a woman doesn't have to cook.
Yes.
So there's that. And then, I spent a lot of time growing up on the coast of Virginia. So I like blue crabs. I like them steamed. I still steam them in my house myself. I don't need butter. I mean, if it's a great day, I get a knife with it, but that was kind of the rite of passage. How fast can you pick a crab? I tend to eat about 30 to 35 in a sitting, so I take it there. That's my jam.
That's amazing.
That's the most amazing thing about me. There you go.
You can pick a crab, no knife.
Expert level.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Thank you.
My wife was born and raised in Maryland, so blue crabs were just part of her existence. And when we moved from California out to Maryland, first time we went out for crabs, met up with some of her friends, and we're sitting down, I didn't know what to do. And the person next to me looks over and goes, they looked right at me and said, "You're not from here, are you?" As I was trying to take my crab apart, it's like, no. I got a lesson and I never forgot. You might think I'm a local at this point.
There you go.
So Homeboy's Crabs in Maryland used to have some of the best crabs. They throw it in a brown bag. I don't know what was in the seasoning, but I was happy to be addicted to it when I lived in Maryland. So I get it.
That's awesome. We love to love seafood, and we love seafood lovers as well.
There you go. Tribe.
I love it. Well, yeah, thank you for joining. It's been a pleasure. Definitely a lot of very insightful pieces to take home, and we really appreciate you taking out the time to meet with us and share some knowledge with us today.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Smart Route Podcast. Share your favorite takeaways with us on Twitter at Smart Route Pod. Smart Route is brought to you by CallTrackingMetrics, and you can find more at calltrackingmetrics.com/podcast. Follow along for ideas and conversations that will inspire your own business path forward. Speaking of smart paths, are your marketing, sales, and service teams on the same page? In today's remote world, it's easy to get disconnected. CallTrackingMetrics can help. We empower smart marketing teams to determine the best route for campaigns by showing exactly which ad campaigns are driving conversations that convert. Operational teams can use that data to automate call flows and power contact center success. Visit CallTrackingMetrics.com to see why more than 100,000 customers around the globe trust CallTrackingMetrics to manage communications for their marketing, sales, and service teams.